Hello everyone, Pulse here, and welcome back to Forging Fantasy, EverQuest Next. Now in this episode we're going to dissect the most recent Round Table Response video, which was all about guilds. In particular, if EverQuest Next would use a system which was all about the singular character in their single guild, or the increasingly popular multiple guild system that we're seeing in more MMOs going forward. Now to start, Omid Dariani and Jeff Butler begin their discussion about the polls and the forums associated with the question about guilds, and it seems to be that the community is very split on this decision, very passionately discussing how they want it to be implemented, with one half or so picking I want the single guild or the I want multiple guild system. It's very split, with very few people kind of sitting on the fence. Now I'm glad to see that there is some passionate discussion going on about this, because the guild systems in MMOs absolutely add to the experience, and they are how you make friends, and they're how you join your social groups, and they're a big part of the MMO experience at large. They are absolutely a major part of that. Now let's get into the meat of the discussion then. They begin by discussing how MMOs worked prior, with guild systems in other games not really facilitating the one character can be all, and one character can grow to become all the classes and all the crafting professions, which is how EverQuest Next and Final Fantasy, A Realm Reborn, and Elder Scrolls Online, and probably tons of other MMOs are looking to do. This is kind of the popular new thing to implement in MMOs. Now, in addition to this, they mention that this idea that you are a single character with very limited scope, it causes guilds to become themed, and the way that you want to play, it themes the guild that you join, and it also causes alts to become a major factor into how guilds are formed in prior MMO guild systems. Now, to an extent, I agree, the alts absolutely add to how a guild is formed and run, but they lost me a bit when they were talking about how typically in prior MMO experiences, you'd have an alt to craft, for example, and then you'd have an alt to raid, and then you'd have a character to PvP, and potentially you're in 3 to 4 different guilds, despite it being a singular guild system. Now, this is not really the experience I've had in my prior MMO experience. Usually what happens is you'd have your guild, which is indeed themed, they're absolutely right about that. You'd have your hardcore PvE or PvP guilds, and then you'd have your much more flexible, or maybe even considered quote-unquote casual guilds, which would be like your PvE RP guilds, or the we can do it all guilds. We don't really discriminate. We have players of all minds, join and you will find somebody to play with, that sort of thing. And it never really came down to the alt. It really never came down to, well, this alt is a crafter, I'm going to put him in a different guild which is completely themed on crafting. That never ever happened to me, and I don't know of anyone that I played with that did it either. Instead, it was your guild used the ranking system, or the labels, to call out if a character was indeed an alt or a crafter, or whatever kind of content they were bound to do. And then, if anything, beyond this, if you couldn't use the labeling or ranking system, multiple guilds came into play, where it was a larger guild relegating alts or crafters to a secondary guild, which was still part of the main guild. The only real reason a secondary one was utilized was for that proper separation of if you had a crafter or an alt, or you hit that player limit in terms of how many people you could have in your guild. It never really came down to the alts were what you picked in terms of your guild, like you had a crafter guild, as I was saying. If anything, it was just, you had your sub guild or your alt guild if you happened to be part of a very sort of organized large guild. It never really came down to what they were talking about, so I'm not really sure. Let me know down in the comments below if their experience is similar to what you've had, because I've absolutely not had that experience, and I don't know of anyone that has. But let's get back into EverQuest Next. Now, from discussing how MMOs typically worked prior, they then begin talking about how EverQuest Next is going to work. Now, as I mentioned before, EverQuest Next is not going to be about alts. Instead, you can have one character, one avatar fill every single role in the game, and effectively do all forms of content. Now, as such, this idea of alt guilds that they were talking about doesn't really work in the paradigm of EverQuest Next. And I think that they are right that this one-man army style of character progression definitely warrants a shift in guild structure. I'm still not really convinced as to where this idea of alt guilds and how they're actually utilized in prior MMOs came about, but I definitely think that the as I said, one-man army kind of character is warranting the shift in guild structure. So then what is SOE actually looking to implement? Well, they're looking to do a multiple guild system, but they made sure to make it clear that they intend to keep chat channels very open and communication very open between the players and the guilds that they are associated with. That way, you can build the multiple guild system structure that you're seeing, as I said, with like larger guilds and sub-guilds, or at the very least, you can stay in communication with the different guild groups that you are associated with in EverQuest Next. Now, this alone is a nice mention and a nice boon to EverQuest Next, mainly because the multiple guild system in Guild Wars 2 was a major issue that I think absolutely contributed to the lacking camaraderie and the guild staying power in terms of continuous community. And it was that the multiple guild system didn't allow communication across guilds. Now, if you were in one guild, for example, you would play with your friends and you were doing your stuff, and then you'd come across another group of players and you'd go, well, you know what, they tossed me an invite, they seem like cool guys, let me go check them out. And you'd have to unrepresent from the current guild that you're in. It doesn't matter if you have friends or not, you couldn't stay in communication with them other than whispers and such. So what would happen is you'd unrepresent and you couldn't communicate with your old guild in their chats or anything. And it made things very awkward. And my experience showed that if you started seeing people not representing in your guild, you could very easily see other players get this perception of guild fall off and guild failure, and players would then begin dropping off themselves, and it would have this tendency to snowball. Guilds falling apart is nothing unfamiliar, but Guild Wars 2 easily takes the cake for a game which had the most guild flops and guild disintegrations in the shortest amount of time. It's only a year old, and my own experience and the experience of my friends and other people that I've talked to that played the game, and just overall on the interwebs in general, is that Guild Wars 2 guilds just are falling apart really hard. You have to have very specific guild communities that are holding together, but in general, guilds are falling apart like crazy. Now, luckily, SOE seems to have taken note of how multiple guild systems have worked previously, both in terms of actual game implementation like Guild Wars 2, and also how they work through more of a social hub system of like websites maybe being utilized to keep multiple guilds together through one larger guild, or the custom chat channels of old maybe even add-ons. I'm sure they're looking at all this stuff. They've been very good to say, we are looking at all of this stuff. So I have faith that they are indeed looking at all of these older and newer implementations for how best to implement multiple guilds. Now finally, they mentioned that despite looking towards multiple guild systems in EverQuest Next, someone don't lynch me please, that they don't want to stomp over the older style of one guild for one character. You've got one group of friends and you're one guild focused on their one main objective for their own objectives. And they absolutely don't want to crush this idea that you can play with one guild, and they don't have any intention to diminish this EverQuest Next. Now, before moving on, I wanted to talk about something that they brought up midway through this little roundtable response, which was that there was some mention about guilds performing large builds and other landmark-based activities. Now, I may have just missed it prior, but I'm pretty sure this is confirmation of guilds being utilized in Landmark, and not just EverQuest Next, the MMO. Now, it isn't really anything super surprising or anything, but as you all know, I love the concrete, so this mention really put a smile on my face, mainly because it got my brain running, thinking about, just imagine this, right? Imagine Minecraft and some of the amazing communities and build groups that have come to thrive in that game, and it's we can build anything if we try. We can build anything we can see in our minds in the environment that's presented in Minecraft. Now just imagine how easy and fluid it's going to be to become part of some of these large groups and some of these amazing build communities when a guild system is implemented right there onto the blank canvas that is Landmark. I really think this is really cool, and I really expect the guild system in Landmark to thoroughly improve how guild and group building is going to occur. It really sounds like some awesome stuff, so I'm glad that they mentioned that. Now let's finish up this episode with some wish list style conversation, shall we? Now, as mentioned prior, I'm not really fond of the multiple guild system due to the strain it can potentially cause with camaraderie, friendship, and guild staying power, and that sort of thing. Now, the risk of a guild to dissolve due to people stretching themselves too thin between multiple guilds is something we can't really deny. Now, on the flip side, the potential social experience that can occur with multiple guilds, and particularly multiple guilds associated with one another, is something that can effectively add to the MMO experience. We cannot deny this either. Now, I know in the past, when I played WoW, for example, I was in a couple times in guilds which were run via multiple sub-guilds, either through websites or multiple chat channels, and we were able to plan some really, really awesome content for us where we'd get really large groups of people to either run like large-scale RP battles or maybe some crazy open-world PvP stuff. I remember there was a couple times we did Wintergrass before that was like a 200 capped thing, I believe it was, back in Wrath. We used to go in there and just have like huge battles. I remember there was a couple times that we would do like guild versus guild raid racing, where we would compete to see which group or guild raid group could finish a hardcore raid the fastest. Sometimes it would just be to see who could complete like reruns or content we've already completed fastest for shits and grins, or sometimes we'd even go as far as like really challenging ourselves to see which guild group could complete the brand new released and tough content as fast as possible, see who could be the champion for that tier of content and stuff. And as you can tell, I'm sure, despite my apprehension towards multiple guilds, some of these things are my fondest memories, which are associated with multiple guild activities. So then, what do I want? What does Pulse want to see in terms of multiple guild system implementation in EverQuest Next? Well, to be completely honest and completely frank with you guys, the open chat channels, which they already mentioned is going to be something they really look to implement, is a huge plus right off the bat. In addition to this, I'd like to see the ability to add custom chat channels. It's such a huge feature, which I think just needs to be in MMOs all the time. This should be something that is absolutely required going into MMOs. I absolutely believe this. They can be used for so much. They can be used to bridge separate large guild chats into one thing so that you can all stay communicating and grab each other's attention when need be, or you can do the opposite of that. You can like separate large guilds into separate little chat channels so that you can have your crafter channel within your guild, or you're looking for a group channel within your guild, so on and so forth. Also with custom chat channels, you can utilize these with multiple guilds so that you can plan stuff, as I mentioned, and you can add this bond between separate guilds, and you can also use them to keep the single player attached to their friends and guildmates in other guilds. So even if you're in a separate guild, if you know the custom chat channel for this other guild that you're associated with, you can stay in contact with them. I'd really like to see SOE provide substantial incentive to play with the guilds you're associated with also, and somehow raise this risk for guild hopping. Now, it's not really something that can be completely contained, obviously, but guilds at their base are all about coming together with like-minded players and sticking together and playing together. Sadly, this idea of having fun isn't enough for a lot of players, both in terms of the guild system here that we're talking about, or in games in general. There's, for whatever reason, this need to have, I don't know, more stuff than fun. I'm not really sure why that is, but in terms of the guild stuff, I think there needs to be some implementation to maybe negate this potential hurting of the guild player base, because as I mentioned with multiple guilds before, you can just jump from one to the other, and even if it's not your intent to ignore the old one, you are absolutely torn. So hopefully they put some way to negate this a little bit so that you are at least attached to your guild and you become part of the guild system, you become part of the guild player base, and that way you have a little bit more hold on the flighty players, as it were. But you know what, guys, that's going to do it for me on this episode of Forging Fantasy EverQuest Next. Let me know in the comments below what you would like to see implemented in EverQuest Next to best make use of the multiple guild system that is going to be implemented. Also, if you've had different experiences with multiple guilds in MMOs that you've played, let me know what you've had for experiences, because I'm incredibly curious to see if my past experiences are common as I think they are, both with Guild Wars 2 and in, like, WoW, as I said, multiple guilds run through custom chat channels and that sort of thing. Finally, if you guys want to hear the full video roundtable response, there will be a link down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and listening on this episode of Forging Fantasy EverQuest Next. If you enjoyed this and found this informative in the slightest, please hit a thumbs up, a comment down below, and make sure to hit that subscribe button as well. It's all very appreciated, as every little bit adds to the channel and I can bring more content for you guys. Before I go, I also want to say apologies if my ramblings are a little bit less focused as usual. I've been sick for about a week, so I'm trying to get back into the groove of things. So apologies if this one was a little bit wonky, so there's always that. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next one.